Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I apologize for our tardiness. We were getting some housekeeping things in order, but welcome, and thank you so much for being here to celebrate the National Day of Racial and Cultural Healing. This day is so important to this region. We've seen reports after report talking about the racial and the implications of racism in this region. So we want to make sure that we are centering this discussion, especially since there is a national day that we could do such. So and one of the reasons, I heard a quote recently that really stuck with me, and I said I was going to use it for today and talk about why we need to have these conversations openly. And the quote that I heard that just really stuck with me is, "Wounds heal in the open." And so when we're talking about racism and the implications of racism and the harms of racism, we can't keep talking about these in our silos. We need to have open conversations about these things so that we can become a better society and a just society for everybody in our society. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to take a moment to thank, obviously, you all who have tuned in, both in person and virtually. I want to thank the elected officials. Right now, we just have Ed here, Mayor Gainey. So thank you, Mayor Gainey, for taking time out of your schedule to be here with us today. He will be reading the proclamation that the city of Pittsburgh did for this day, which actually, this day is actually the National Day of Racial Healing is actually the day after Dr. Martin Luther King Day, so it was actually last Tuesday. But our program today is going to walk us into the Allegheny County Council's proclamation, so that's why we're holding our program today. I want to thank the members of the Allegheny County Black Mental Health Table, and specifically Dr. Kathy Sigmund, who really motivated us in this region to uplift this day. It was her continued persistence and just, love for this work that helped shape this program and the celebration of this day. I want to thank the Black Equity Coalition for their continued support in this work, and specifically Alyssa, who is here from the Black Equity Coalition, who is holding down our chat section. So please make sure that if you have questions, you put them in the chat, because we will have some time at the end for questions and answers. I want to thank NAMI for hosting on their page and all of their support. They did the graphics. I want to thank Alita, who really just joined the Black Mental Health Table and just came in and hit the ground running. So thank you so much, Alita. I want to thank PJ, who is our camera person. And you would not be viewing me right now without him, so thank him for all of his help and coordination as the tech people did their own coordination outside of me once I made that connection. I truly appreciate that. And then lastly, thanks to my council staff for their support and their help in support of this day. And specifically my chief of staff, Ken Verhella, and the person who put together the proclamation for this evening, Michelle. So thank you. So again, we will have a question and answer session at the end of this program, so please share your insights, give us your questions. We will be eager to hear them at the end of this program. But right now, without further ado, I would like to bring Mayor Gainey up for his remarks about this day and to read the proclamation from the city of Pittsburgh. Mayor Gainey?
Thank you, Councilman. Before I begin, first and foremost, when we talk about racial healing, I don't think that we should go a day and we should take a moment to talk about Alma Speed Fox, a pioneer in civil rights, and what she did in her career to bring racial healing to this city, to fight for women's rights. She passed away last night. And for those that know that we are almost at the end of losing a generation of civil rights icons, that really without them, we wouldn't be sitting here today. And I think that we should take a moment in time to just recognize the great impact that they've had on this region. Alma Speed Fox was wonderful when it came to racial healing. And everything that she fought to move us forward is amazing. And a lot of times we don't give credit to that. So before I go any further, I just wanted to say to Alma Speed Fox and her family, my deepest condolence, you in my prayers, and thank you for being the trailblazer that you are. And I didn't say were or are, because her spirit lives on. And whereas we understand and recognize that there is racial divide in our country, and that we must all work hard to heal the wounds accumulated over hundreds of years created by racial, ethnic, and religious bias, and to build an equitable and just society so that we can all thrive. And whereas we have all witnessed racial divisiveness throughout the rising in America, urban, rural, suburban, and tribal communities today that threaten the very core of this country's unity. And whereas, like those who came before us, it is our duty to protect the people of the Commonwealth and maintain communities in which they may all be given the opportunity to succeed. And whereas children have the right to be provided for in every opportunity, to learn in every situation, to grow in every community, and to thrive in nourishing environments that prioritize their safety, dignity, and humanity. And whereas every single person has the capability to make a simple change within themselves that can have a profound effect on the entire society. And whereas racial healing is vital and critical, and a critical commitment to education, social, mental, and overall well-being of Pennsylvania. And whereas we know that in racial healing, we bring communities together that will represent more tolerance, more love, more understanding, more respect, more for each other, to be with one another, to understand the history of how we all got here and why at the end of every ethnic name is the word American. If we could learn to respect each other's culture, not based on color, gender, equity, or anything like that, but just based on the fact of a humanitarian standpoint that we are all God's people. If we could understand that, we could move forward. And so today, let it be resolved that I, Ed Gainey, Mayor of the City of Pittsburgh, recognize today to be racial healing in our great city. And if you want to heal somebody, educate them about your culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Gainey. You are always, always powerful and right on point with your messaging, so we appreciate you. Sala, don't go far, you're next. So I did thank elected officials, and we do have another elected official that joined us. The newly elected president of the Pittsburgh Public School Board, Salahuddin, whose work is monumental in this arena of racial and ethnic healing. So I will bring Sala up now to make remarks on the impact or the significance of the day and how it connects to the Pittsburgh Public Schools. Sala? Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for putting me behind one of the most prolific speakers in the city of Pittsburgh. Nobody wants to come behind Ed Gainey. The timing of this day of racial healing is significant for me. I would also repeat Ed's reference to a trailblazer who left us too soon, even though she's been here for a long time. A long time is not long enough when you lose somebody you love. Alma Speed Fox was a true trailblazer, and we will miss her. We will miss the contribution that she made to racial healing. Those of us at the school district believe we have a special role in providing the foundation for racial healing by educating our children. what they bring into the world will be determined by what we give them as young children today. That's our job. And we couldn't have a more significant job than to provide the education, the direction that our children need to move forward in life. It is significant at this time because the right-wing forces in this country would have us go back to the 1800s when it was illegal. It was illegal to educate black people. And today, the same right-wing efforts are being made to prevent education today, only they give it a new name, critical race theory, as though teaching the truth or being critical about race should be illegal. And so, although nobody is teaching critical race theory in grades kindergarten through 12, they grasp the name and make it what they want it to be. If you can define it, you can create it. And that's what they're doing. They have many people who believe that teaching black history, Chicano history, Asian history is critical race theory, is teaching the truth is critical race theory. They wouldn't know critical race theory if it ran over them like a truck. But if they can make us believe that the truth of history is critical race theory and that that is bad and that it shouldn't be done to children, then we may hesitate about whether or not we will teach the truth, whether or not we will be bold in teaching the truth just because they call it by a name, critical race theory. That's our job. That's our role, to know the difference, to share the difference with the children, to share the difference with their parents, and to help empower their parents to fight for the right for their children to know the truth. That's what we're doing. And the truth will heal. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about healing, racial healing. We're at a very decisive point in this country. We have to decide what kind of country we're going to be. Is it going to be the continuation of racial oppression, or are we going to create a multicultural democracy that has room for everybody? That's what Ed Gaeding keeps talking about. Room for everybody. That's the decision that lies before us, and that's the decision that made you blow up this day of healing. And going forward, all of us together, there's enough room for everybody. There's enough food for everybody to eat. There's enough clothes for everybody to have something on their back. There's enough for everybody. We just have to have the will to open the doors and let everybody in. Ed, thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it. And thank you, Elmer Williams' daughter. I can't believe you little baby grew up. Okay, thank you very much for coming. And all y'all just coming in this snow to hear this presentation. I appreciate you all for coming out, having the determination. That's the kind of determination Alma Speed Fox had. That's the kind of determination we need going forward to do racial healing in America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sala. And yes, you will hear later on when we present the proclamation. If you don't know who Elmer Williams is, you will learn today. But he's also my daddy. So, that is what Sala was referring. But he brought up so many relevant points, and just dropped so much. Having the Mayor Gainey and Sala speak right behind each other just gave so many nuggets for us to think about. I was sharing with folks before we started that I actually had to leave class early today to be here for this, and the class that I'm taking is actually a race, law, gender, and policy class where we have many of these discussions. And one of the discussions that has been prevalent in this class is the grouping of ethnic folks. So when we talk about Africans, we talk about Africans. We don't talk about them as the individual countries within Africa. When we talk about Asians, we just group Asians all as Asians. We don't divvy them out as in their cultures of Chinese, Japanese, so forth and so on. And so I think really what part of the theme of this day is to see the individualism of all of us, to not be so quick to group and place us into these categories, these socially constructed categories, but to see us, to allow us to be. And so with that, we're going to move into our panel, and I'm going to introduce the folks that will be joining on the panel. And just added Mayor Gainey, so he will be joining us as he comes back from his conversation with Board President Sala. He'll join the panel. And we also have Dr. Kathy Sigmund, who is part of HEAL PA and was, again, the catalyst for us to celebrate this day. She's a practicing psychologist and behavioral health director at the Northside Christian Health Center. Dr. Kathy connects the trauma of racism in her work as she serves at Welcoming Pittsburgh, serves as a deacon at Allegheny Center Alliance Church, and continues to push us all to center this trauma in our work too. Alita Barnett is NAMI Keystone PA's Director of Education and Support Services. Like I told you earlier, Alita recently joined the Allegheny County Black Mental Health Group and hit the ground running. Her help and support was instrumental in pulling this event off. Thank you, Alita. And then Dominica Brown is the Chief Financial Officer for Primary Care Health Services, Inc. She graciously agreed to join us today to help us understand the limitations and allowances within fiscal ways to fund the work we will talk about today. So before we go to the panel, we will share a short video that will help frame this conversation. So.
Question for you. How do you deal with trauma?
I don't really know how to.
Okay.
I kind of just hope that it goes away.
And there's a level of humility that has to come in when we talk about mental health and emotions, because we're not going to understand everybody and why they feel the way that they do. And that's the hardest thing that I think that's been taken from the Black community, is our right to feel.
There's this stoicism about us, and it's like we're not allowed to be upset, not allowed to have depression or anxiety.
Our mental health is usually leveraged against us to really be the basis of the science and laws that existed to enslave us. A lot in our culture think that you can just pray things away. And I believe in prayer, no doubt. I also understand that not one miracle in the Bible occurred without the person needing the miracle taking action.
I was just wondering, what is healing like for you? Like how would you say that you heal?
Be kind to yourself. Whether you're a parent, whether you're a child, and allowing yourself to feel, I think it starts there.
Mm-hmm. It's important for us to give ourselves permission to try to find what our words are, to name what's happening.
All of these things that we're talking about, we've never talked about before. And that's what's celebratory about this conversation, is that now we can be better parents, we can be better grandparents, we can be better aunts and uncles. We can say, wait a minute, they need this conversation right now.
You're never really alone. There's somebody out there that loves you or that will love you. You just have to find that person. They'll come around when you need them the most or when they need you the most, and y'all will help each other.
Having that perspective that it's a journey and it's okay to smile through the journey.
Okay, say that again. Say it again. It's okay.
It's okay to smile through the journey.
Welcome back, and we hope you enjoyed the video that helped shape the conversation today. So we're going to start out very broadly and then kind of center in or rein it in as we go through this conversation today. So my first question for the panelists, and I'm sorry, I never introduced myself, but I'm right here in front of you, the name, there you go. Liv Bennett, County Councilor for District 13. So I apologize for my non-introduction, but there you go. So moving on, first question, why is the Day of Racial and Cultural Healing needed? And I'm gonna throw this to our motivator here, Dr. Kathy, first.
It's absolutely needed in terms of the multiple wounds that has been sustained across time in our country and actually globally related to ethnic wars, ethnic conflicts, oppression, discrimination, and these wounds are not just individual, they're not just group-based or community-based, they're societal wounds. Creating a culture which people are wounded just for their ethnic group, their racial group, for who they are. And to give space in our society for kindness, compassion, goodness, love, to put a salve on the wounds is the greatest need that we all have. To give opportunity for hope and caring among and within different ethnic groups, racial groups, is why America should have been born.
Amen to that. So I'm gonna toss this question to our mayor because I know he has some thoughts on why this day is absolutely needed. So I'm asking him to share.
You know, the number one reason is just the truth. You know, I think that a lot of times, you know, I've said this before growing up, that you really, in America, we have so many different ethnicities, but we only really understand European culture because throughout K through 12, all we really did was study European history. And we never really studied American history, meaning we never talked about African American, Latinas, Asians, Jews. We never talked about the other ethnic groups that make up America and how we got here and where our plight was from, and have us to understand each other better. Or more importantly, those that made inventions but never got credit because of the color of their skin, so they had to give up their inventions to other people for other people to get credit just because of the color of their skin. I think at some level the truth is healing. I think when we talk about healing, it's because we come together. I look at our families, and particularly in the African American community. You know, my grandma used to have this saying, right, that there would be some secrets that she takes to the grave with her. And what we learn is that no secret stays buried. more or less like they're planted, and they always come back. And so when I see our community and I think about where we've traveled from to where we are right now and the journey that we still have to go, it's amazing how much we've overcome. And just think about if our children understand the journey that we were on from the beginning to now, that they wouldn't see themselves as thugs and gangsters, but kings and queens, just because they understand of all that we've overcome. And so racial healing to me is the revelation of truth and allowing truth to be the benchmark for everybody to understand one another.
Woman, can I come in?
I just wanted to ask Alita real quick from NAMI, her opinion, but also adding on, because you're not from NAMI and NAMI's work includes a lot of, intervention and healing. So combining the need with what does healing look like as we address this need?
So thank you again for having me. I do believe, like Mr. Gainey said, the truth. They say the truth can set you free. And so understanding that it is a bigger issue. It's not just one person, and that we are not alone. So that's something NAMI, really gets that message across. And just try to normalize this conversation and not, people have this stigma around mental health, around getting treatment for mental health, even admitting that maybe they don't feel as strong or whole as they used to. Within our community, those type of things are seen as, and this is not true, but sometimes they're painted as a weakness. And we might feel that way ourselves, admitting that, especially people who are really struggling with financially or just with family, to admit that you yourself needs help is a really big step. So I think normalizing the conversation, making it okay to seek help, and then just have these resources available out here. That's one of the reasons I created the African American Mental Health Resource Guide solely for Allegheny County, just to try to, again, normalize treatment, and so people can understand that there are people out there that look like you who are providing services. And sometimes that might just not be the sole factor that makes you fit with a person, but it is a start where you can feel comfortable and a person can share similar experiences. So.
Absolutely. And Dr. Kathy, you had something that you wanted to add before I go to Dominica to ask a question on how we fund this work.
Yes, I just wanted to just piggyback on what our mayor mentioned, and the truth being so important and so healing in and of itself. And then when you think of the term American, just like you mentioned, how many times do folks think of the Native Americans, the first Americans, and then sometimes it's even questioned, North American, who do you think of? And oftentimes folks think when you're talking about like outside of our settings, it's oftentimes white, European, people of European descent. But the first Americans were people of color. The first Americans were Native Americans. As well as Mexicans are North American, and so why don't we even consider them of an American, right? They're a part of that continent. And so anyway, the way we label things is extremely important. How we label things. And to just piggyback on what Alita mentioned, when you're traumatized through racial issues, it's not the victim of that racial issue or that racial incident that should be pathologized. It should be the perpetrators that have the sickness, not the victims.
Yes, that's a whole mind shift in itself, because our culture is really embedded in victim blaming instead of perpetrator blaming, but hold that for our next panel. So I wanted to come to Dominica, and as we talk about some of these interventions, especially like NAMI, just and Alita, shout out to you for that resource guide. It's really awesome. I did look at it. It's great. So I hope folks are able to access that guide and use it as a resource because it has some really valuable information. And when I was searching for information on Dr. Kathy, I was actually found some information on a Christian Black therapist site. So if you're looking for a Christian Black therapist, I'm sitting 2 seats from one. So just putting that out there. So Dominica, we talk about this work and some of the things that are needed, interventions. As I shared with you earlier, my vision for creating the Allegheny County Black Mental Health Group was to kind of figure out some alternative interventions to keeping people out of some of these systems and larger providers. I will not name them specifically on this broadcast, but basically to keep them out of violent situations as they seek to get mental health treatment. We are advocating for folks to address their mental health. We're trying to destigmatize mental health in our community. We have many people out here doing the work, but maybe aren't titled or fall into a clinician. So how do we fund those folks, or what are some some hindrances or some allowances that we may have that you know of that we can kind of leverage to help advance this work?
Okay, so something that Mayor Gainey always talks about is community with an emphasis on unity, right? And so when we think about what is needed for mental health, oftentimes a healthy community and a healthy environment is what allows people to flourish mentally. So then whenever we consider the financial impacts of mental health, whenever that community is broken and there is no unity and the support structure around those folks, then the financial costs skyrocket. When we think about folks who have undiagnosed or unaddressed conditions and how they may materialize either mentally or physically in a social setting, work or school setting, oftentimes whenever it's to the point where it's acute and an emergency, then that's when the cost is the most high as well, right? So I think that with collaboration and unity in this city amongst folks who really have an interest in seeing people to be well, because when people are well, then the costs aren't as high for their care. And so I think a collaborative conversation with a lot of major players in this city can really bring heads and pockets together to fund the work that needs to happen. And ultimately, everyone in that relationship benefits. Most importantly, the folks who need the care.
Yes. I just see a very, see this as being a very good opportunity to have those conversations, to reshape and reimagine, if you will, how we deliver these services, especially to our community, which again is an uphill battle as we try to destigmatize mental health and mental health treatment. And the reason why we're talking about mental health is connected to racial healing. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to answer that. I'm going to ask Dr. Kathy that. Why are we talking about mental health as related to racial and cultural healing?
We're talking about mental health because there is not a racial incident that happens where there's not mental health and psychiatric ramifications. Whether you're talking about direct assaults or indirect assaults that we look at in health settings, we often look at things called social determinants of health. These are other factors other than physiological factors that impact a person's health outcomes, including things like food, housing, transportation, you name it. There are so many barriers to our health. And as we have these assaults on mental health, whether it's bullying, whether it's microaggressions, and other racial incidents, it impacts not just that individual, But as was mentioned, it impacts our society because as people become assaulted, traumatized, they're less productive at work, or if they're in school, less productive at school. So you have all these various outcomes that are affected because of racism. Racism really harms our entire society. It's not just one group of people. It harms everybody. And so we hone in on mental health because I think it's most readily seen in mental health. And just to put a little bit of research into the importance of mental health. If you look at the trajectory of behavioral health problems among white children and behavioral health problems among African American children or Black children, particularly in boys, if that child is white, they're more likely to have access to mental health services. They're more likely to receive mental health services for those behavioral problems. And you can talk about this very same behavioral problems. If that child is Black or African American, their trajectory is not mental health services. Their trajectory is often jail. You know? And so that's problematic when you have a significant portion of the population that needs mental health services, but instead of mental health services, they get criminalization.
And that is absolutely apparent if you look at the population of the Allegheny County Jail. So I'll just leave that there. But to Mayor Gainey, we've recently experienced a murder at Oliver High School. We share this district, you as mayor, myself as a councilwoman. Oliver is overlappingly in both of our districts. When we talk about the need for racial healing and we see the violence that has upticked in our schools, what is the connection between and the emphasis of this day and how we can use this conversation to help start eliminating and advancing peace? That's your word, Ed. Advancing peace in our schools.
You know, that's a good question. And I think that there's so many layers to it that there's not one solution. Like, we'll never find one size fit all. You know, I often say one of the ills is that we invest more money into public safety than we do public health. And public safety will never create a healthier environment, but investing in public health will always create a safer environment. And we don't invest in public health. We don't. And in our community, it is always looked at as a situation of we can just overcome it. We just strong enough to overcome it. And understanding why we feel that way is important. I mean, like, even if you take it back to getting off of a boat, watching your mom, she done been raped, beat, daddy been killed, kids been sold into slavery, overcome it. You know, Jim Crow 1, Jim Crow 2, 3/5 of a man, overcome it. Couldn't put money in a bank, couldn't go to school, couldn't pray, couldn't own land, overcome it. Couldn't vote if you an African American man to the 15th Amendment, overcome it. Couldn't vote if you was a woman to the 19th Amendment, overcome it. The Industrial Revolution that was supposed to create jobs, overcome it. Civil rights, white hair, black hair, overcome it. Mass incarceration, overcome it. First African American in the White House, did we make it? That's a lot of trauma to have to go through to get to where we got through without recognizing the pain to turn toward joy. And never having the ability to be able to celebrate it because it's always looked at as a pain and not as a joy to be able to say, look how far we've come. I don't think we celebrate our history long enough. I've often said we need a public health plan, and I mean that. Because we're the only country in the world that promotes violence the way we promote violence. Everybody else talks about peace resolution, peace in our streets. We talk about stop the violence. We always market violence, but we never market peace. And that's why, you know, my administration will be working on a public health plan. One that talks about how we eliminate and create peace. Whether that's how we talk about getting away from poverty. And because that's the key and that's the root to everything. If the only thing in my life I see is Frankstown and Homewood Avenue, that becomes my reality. And a lot of times we don't recognize that our children are growing up in a situation where it is our reality. And then on the faith-based side, and I'm not trying to get real religious with it, but I am getting spiritual with it, that our kids know more rap songs than they know scripture. So at the end of the day, it's in vain in their spirit exactly what they see and how they perceive life. That's a reality that we don't talk about, but it's a reality that's real. And a lot of it started in my generation. Look, I grew up liking Tupac, Biggie, and all them. Them are the rappers that I grew up liking, understanding the difference between perception and reality. But to a child that doesn't understand that, they take those lyrics and scriptures in their spirit and they end up living them out. So the trauma is longer than just our history, which is a major part. The trauma is also today of the lyrics that they listen to put something in their spirit to make them want to act that way. Mm-hmm. And until we figure out a public health plan to address a lot of the issues that we just discussed, the next 20 years we'll be still having the same conversation.
He's always preaching. I always feel like I need to pass a collection plate after he speaks. But yes, I agree with all of that. It reminds me of a story that my pastor uses a lot, and it's about a person who's wrestling with two sides of themselves. They have a wolf side and they have a lamb side, and they ask which side is going to win, and the answer is whatever side you feed more. And so to your comments, when we're talking about what our kids are ingesting and what they're exposed to, when we are exposing them to more violence and more things that are outside of wellness, whether that's spirituality, there's many ways to wellness therapy. We're not advocating or prescribing one specific way, but we are saying that we have to be intentional on what we expose our children to if we want to see different results. So I absolutely agree with that. I did have a question I think I skipped over, but it is relevant. And so I'm going to toss this to anybody who wants to answer it, because we are coming up on our time and we'll be going to question and answers right after this. So please put your questions in the chat. What is the difference between racial healing and cultural healing?
So racial or ethnic healing is looking at a specific group of people and looking internally to see what indigenous or internal mechanisms do they have in terms of healing themselves, what external mechanisms may be in place. We talked about counseling and therapy, which I think is just one little drop of what's needed here as a mechanism of healing. On the other hand, culture is something we all live with. We can label or identify with specific ethnic or racial groups, but we all live in American culture. We all live in this larger Pittsburgh culture that includes all of us. So if we, especially this day, a day that we celebrate ethnic racial healing, we need to really think about that. That's a fantastic question. We really need to think about cultural healing, because it's going to take all of us coming together and working on this issue of how do we love one another better? How do we attend to one another better? How do we affirm and respect one another better? How do we heal those breaches? How do we heal those wounds together, collectively, and societally? So that's the difference. It's all of us coming together to create a culture here.
I get that. When I think about that, I think about like Squirrel Hill. When you go to Squirrel Hill, what culture do you imagine when you hear Squirrel Hill? Most of us think Jewish, right? So that makes sense to me. So Alyssa, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, okay. So to begin, we have more of a thought from the chat, quoting, normalizing that we need healing and that it is okay in finding this outlet. It is indigenous to us and can be best utilized as a healthy response to the racial trauma we experience constantly. So kind of going off of that, I'm wondering if anyone on the panel has maybe an example of what healing might look like, either broadly or in our community here in Allegheny County. Thank you.
So I think healing, again, starts with the truth and understanding the need to heal, and understanding that there's a community that is right with you that needs to heal. Healing looks like educating yourself. And I always say language matters. We were talking about, the difference when people say, stop the violence versus, promoting peace. Same with mental health issues. It's starting with yourself, just understanding the language, maybe, switching up languages, even talking amongst friends. And so I think, and there's a story, you mentioned your pastor had this story about the wolf and the sheep. Well, there's a story about, a man on a boat, and the boat starts to sink, and, someone comes to save him, and he said, that's okay, I'm waiting on God, God's gonna save me. A second man came, tried to save him, same thing, that's okay, my Lord's gonna save me. Third man came, same thing. I'm okay. I got my God. He's going to save me. So the man drowns, and he gets to heaven. He said, what happened? Thought you were going to save me. And God said, well, I sent you 3 boats. So the same thing with providers, with your resources you have in your community. You can have therapists and Jesus. It's possible. So, just really using your resources, really understanding the reasons to heal, understanding that you're not alone in this, and just starting those conversations, even in your own household, again, to try to normalize mental health.
Yes. Also, in addition to what we call formal healing and formal helpers, like the counselors, the therapists, and other folks, there's also communal ways of healing and informal ways of healing as well that are also important. So we're not ditching one for the other. For example, I attend a church. It's called Allegheny Center Alliance Church, and it's no secret that 30, 40 years ago, this church was all white. And if I were to go to that church, they would have quickly turned me around, sent me to the Robinson Street Church, which was another Alliance church that is all black. And so, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, what's the most segregated time in the United States? It's Sunday mornings. And so what happened, my church got a new pastor, 35 years ago or so, and that pastor was Reverend Dr. Rock Dillerman, and he had a call from God to change that. He felt like God had called him to come to that church and to change that scenario. And over the years, as some white people were like, no, I don't want to do this, well, then there's the door. Goodbye. Others, and the vast majority of others, said, no, this is something that God has called us to do. We're going to heal the racial divide on Sunday mornings, and we're going to invite this African American and other types of communities, ethnic communities, into this church. We're not just going to invite them in. We're going to make them leaders in this church. We're going to change our music. So it's not just white European or Christian contemporary music all the time, but we're going to have hymns. We're going to have African American music. So the entire church changed its genre, its style, everything to accommodate those people that were on the outside, to make sure they invited them in. Just like the story of the Good Samaritan. And we can go on, but that's right, we're not supposed to be. So I will stop. But, and I just love that about that church. And I know that other churches are doing the same, but that's a community approach. And it's saying you're important enough that we're going to change everything to make sure that you're included in this us that's, bigger than just European Americans, white Americans.
Yeah, your church is dope. I have to give a shout out to ACAC. That's what it's shortly called, ACAC, for anybody who knows it. But they also have a very big mental health component to that church. If you're looking for some Christian minister, some Christian therapists, ACAC has them on deck. I've been there. I've used the therapy services there, both individually and for marriage counseling. So I highly recommend it, and I am not ashamed to say I enjoy my couch visits every other week. So, Mayor Gainey?
Yeah, I think you hit something that was critical as we really talk about healing, right? The one thing I've learned in my life, and I use me, so no one can say anything else, is that a lot of times we don't face our childhood scars. And everybody that walks this earth has a childhood scar. And because that childhood scar was so painful to us at a young age, we really never address it. And so we multiply that pain throughout our life by either masquerading it or doing something other than what is healthy to be able to say, I want to forget, to the point that we do forget, but the pain of that feeling never goes anywhere. And I always tell people it's okay to get counseling, because if you don't do something to deal with your childhood scars, and it doesn't matter where you come from, we all have childhood scars. And if you don't do something to address your childhood scars, then none of the other healing can help you. It just can't help you. Because at the end of the day, if you don't deal with your own pain that makes you feel some type of way, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to do what's necessary, you want to medicate it in ways that are unhealthy. If you don't do something to address that childhood scar, even if you don't remember what it is, you got to find a way to get it out of you. Because living with it is the heaviest bag you will ever, ever, ever have to carry.
Again, couldn't agree more. Do we have any other questions? Or anybody else up here? You have anything else to add, Dominica? Alita, do you have something else to add?
Yeah, just real quick. When you're talking about, making sure you address your childhood scars and maybe not even know what that is, I'm in therapy, and my therapist said, if you don't address kind of the core things, then it's just going to be this continuous remix of whatever problem. So like different situation, different people, same issue. So it's just a remix, and you might think the situation is better, but sooner or later, that same tune's going to come around, and that's going to continue. So I really, just wanted to piggyback and say that's definitely the great advice.
One of my other favorite sayings is, you can't heal what you won't reveal. So we all need to do what we need to do and really, dig deep and find what our childhood traumas are or our traumas are, period, so that we can make sure that we're addressing them. And thank you again, Mayor Gainey. He was a last-minute addition to the panel, so I appreciate the time that he's carved out today for us. But he has to go now. He is the mayor. So, so Alyssa, is there any other questions in the chat?
Yes, Liv. I am seeing about 2 more questions in the chat right now. So kind of piggybacking off of this last conversation. Let's see. Do you think that Christianity or religion may put certain people off from seeking mental health services? So I don't know if Dr. Kathy Sigmund, do you want to speak to that, or anybody?
Certainly, absolutely. Some people, regardless of whether it's Christianity, Islam, other faiths, they all have this range, right? So you can have very conservative people that are sometimes anti-psychology, anti-counseling, anti-therapy, which is very, very sad. Just like you were talking about that, the story of the boats that God sends to us. But then you have some that are very, very open. And so we have found that we meet people where they are. I serve as Director of Behavioral Health and Community Wellness at Northside Christian Health Center. It's faith-based, but we're very respectful of everybody who comes through our doors. Recently had a woman of the Muslim faith that came through the door, and she's like, well, I want this or I want that. We're like, we will accommodate you and do whatever we can. But I could tell that there was this hesitancy around counseling, so absolutely. But I would say it would be remiss to think that if a person is identifying as Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu, that necessarily means they're saying no to counseling or yes to counseling. So they run a range like anybody else.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything?
I would just say that, and I'm sorry, Alyssa, the question was, would spirituality kind of turn people off from counseling?
Yeah, so I can read it from the chat. So to repeat, the question was, do you think that Christianity put certain people off from seeking mental health services?
Yes, absolutely. So Interesting question, because I actually struggled with this in my Christian walk, and I actually walked away from organized religion, if you will, for a while because of, oh, well, if you're depressed, you just don't have enough Jesus. You need to pray more. And like clinical depression is not a thing. Like hormonal imbalance is not a thing. And that there is not a medical intervention, just like for lung cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure. Would you tell somebody with high blood pressure they don't have enough Jesus and throw their high blood pressure pills on the altar and pray it away? Like, no, you wouldn't. You would encourage them to follow their doctor's orders. And so I think there is a place in Christianity where folks are, they don't acknowledge that mental health is an actual real condition, and therefore kind of dismiss folks who are actually, struggling with those issues.
I've been pretty quiet because all of these topics are not my expertise, but I do have something that I wanted to share about that. I think that oftentimes spirituality and mental health are separated from each other, where they're actually very integral. For you to have a healthy mental health, you kind of have to have some sort of spiritual practice or understanding, because that's where you often find purpose, and that's where a lot of healing comes in when you have mental health struggles. And so I think that, kind of along the same theme of what we've been discussing all afternoon around history and knowledge and having these discussions, I think that it's important to continue it so that people start to understand and realize and know that, just as, our bodies, each part of our body has a very significant purpose, our environment, our mental health, our spirituality, our diet, all of those things are very important when it comes to mental health. And so they shouldn't be treated separate. If anything, they should be very integrated.
Yeah, we do have a habit of compartmentalizing our being, right? Like the soul is not connected to the spirit, which is not connected to the mind, or even, more practically, the leg has nothing to do with the arm, or the chest has nothing to do with the back. I know I've been guilty. I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing this ailment, so this probably has nothing to do with that. And then come full circle, it has everything to do with that. So I do think there is a compartmentalization that happens when we're talking about our wholeness.
Also, I think one of the complicating factors in looking at traditional therapies, including something like psychoanalysis and some the old former therapies, is that they are very much westernized based, European-based therapies. And I would argue that folks that had a problem with those kinds of therapies way back when, psychoanalysis, this, that, and the other, they were not shown as effective, right? So I think that there is an argument for looking at culturally informed methods of addressing behavioral health issues, mental health issues within ethnic minoritized communities. And I want to highlight that I said ethnic minoritized communities. We're not, if you look at us throughout the world, we're not the minority, but we have been minoritized. That's, again, the labeling of it. And to make sure that as you seek therapy and counseling, it is in line with your values, it is in line with your cultural beliefs as well, because they're not all the same.
Yeah, and just to not directly address the spiritual question, but we have brought up a lot of good points, and it's just been sitting on me to speak about it, because sometimes we go to a medical doctor and complain of physical problems. You might have really pain in your shoulder, or get really bad headaches, or can't sleep. And so when we communicate these things to our medical doctor, again, it's just like, oh, here's some ibuprofen, or they don't really ask about your mental health, and maybe that is the cause of some of these physical things, because, those of us that know, like, anxiety can feel like or a panic attack can feel like a heart attack. So just again, educating yourself about what these signs and symptoms might look like, and then be an advocate for yourself when you go to your medical doctor, saying, well, I haven't really been feeling myself lately, or whatever the conversation is, but just trying to put that into your wellness plan. It's just not always, just because you're feeling something physical, I'm not sure, it might be connected to your mental health. So that's what I was, saying, like how, you said that leg is not connected to the arm and that, but, we all need it all to work right, so.
Absolutely. And you had something more, Dominica?
Just quickly, and it's kind of going a little further left, but
go ahead.
Well, left that way. But whenever you talk about how your mental health can impact your physical health, and that kind of goes back to what I was thinking around having conversations with a lot of people who will be interested in improving the whole health of folks, because that will save lots of dollars for a lot of major organizations and corporations, and even the county in this area. And so an example would be a person who has diabetes. Suppose they have this relationship with food that they just continuously eat the things that they know that they shouldn't eat, but their stress and their depression drives them to not want to let this vice go. So their diabetes continues to worsen, right? Or they aren't able to manage it in a way that they could function much better if they did. And they would have less visits to the doctor, less visits to the emergency room, less costly medications if their mental health was addressed.
That is an excellent point, because we do that. Guilty. So I'm fasting sweets right now because the scale just kept going up and up and up, and maybe that was me ingesting something that was connected to something else. So thank you, Dominica, for pointing that one out. Alyssa, you had one more question?
So for the last question I'm seeing in the chat, explaining that it is a challenge to gauge competence in any culture. Would it be better to move towards contextual competence versus cultural competence? And there's a little bit more explanation if anyone needs that as well. Yes. So contextual competence, meaning understanding the myriad of context in which people function, and how these influence behaviors, aka like the childhood scars Mayor Adgani was talking about, and cultural influence, etc.
That's an interesting question and theory. To me, it sounds like kind of individualism as opposed to grouping, maybe. And maybe that's just because we talked about that in class right before I got here. But I would need to really ponder that some more to have a really succinct answer. But I think, and I'm always of the opinion, why do we have to choose to? Can we do both? Can we celebrate culture and also understand conceptualism as well? Is there room? We always, in our society, we seem to always pin the choices it's either this or that. But oftentimes it's not always this or that. It could be both. It could be it could be both. It could be neither. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Anybody have any other thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm also having difficulty understanding the question, and I'm not sure exactly why, but it seems to me and I agree with you, Councilwoman, it sounds reductionistic to me. In other words, they're trying to do an either or sort of thing, there's only one answer at the end of the day, but you cannot decontextualize a person from their culture. You can't decontextualize, as you mentioned, your soul from your spirit, or your body from you just can't do that and serve the person well holistically. So, yeah, unless I have some more details or understanding the context of that is, I don't understand it.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I agree with you. My thoughts were the same, that when you think about the context of the situation, you cannot exclude culture, environment, race. You cannot exclude all of those things, because all of those things are impacting the picture that we're looking at. So I think the conversation would still be pretty similar.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, thank you. I want to thank my panelists. I think this was a great conversation. This conversation was never to be the all-in-all solution or whole conversation. This was supposed to be a jump-off. This was supposed to be to initiate further conversation, and hopefully this has done that. And hopefully you all will continue the conversations in your own spheres. I also want to highlight that though this has been a production and effort of love by the Allegheny County Black Mental Health Table, obviously the National Day of Racial Healing does not only include Black people, it includes our indigenous people, it includes our Asian American people. And when I say that with as much love as possible, without, because I understand the need of separating you all out. It includes our Latinx population, our immigrant population. So it is inclusive. The idea of this day is to be as wide as and inclusive as humanly possible. We want to understand and appreciate all of our cultures, our races, and have the healing conversation of all ways that our society has been harmful to different races in different experiences. We could talk about Japanese internment. We could talk about the indigenous being, removed from their land, put on reservations. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I implore folks to learn history, to learn their history, to study the history, and then do better because we know better, right? So all of that to say, thank you all again for joining. Thank you again to my panelists. Thank you again to Mayor Gainey and Salahuddin. Reminder that we will do the formal county council proclamation today at the 5 o'clock regular meeting. Alyssa will drop the link for the link for the meeting in the chat, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much again for joining, and have a great day, and celebrate any day and every day as a day of racial healing. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Great.